Did you know that the design of honkaistarrail's Phainon is based on Roman-era fashion trends? Phainon is easily one of Amphoreus' most memorable characters. We witness his entire journey, from the time he was just a small villager boy hoping to be a hero, to when he bore the weight of his world 33 million times over until the new dawn finally broke. It isn't an understatement to say that he has one of the most fleshed out backstories in the game, the depth of which reflects in his actual outfit. Visually, we see Phainon's appearance change a few times throughout the story, from his childhood in Idyllic all the way to when he becomes Khaslana. Each of these designs clash with Amphoreus' classical Greek theme when contrasted with characters like Aglaia or Mirage, and HOYO-Verse has actually directly talked about some of the modern media that inspired him, like Kevin Khaslana, Gojo, Himmel the Hero, and others. This is because the biggest historical influence on Phainon's design is actually fashioned from the broader Roman period, all the way from ancient Rome to the Byzantine Empire. In this video, I'll be analyzing these specifically Roman elements of Phainon's various designs and tying them to his character and role in Amphoreus' story. Before I talk about Phainon's outfit, it's important to explain the link between ancient Greece and Rome. In the 3rd century BC, Rome clashed with Hellenic forces for the first time in southern Italy. Though at great cost, Rome triumphed over the Greek forces, who were surprised to find that the Romans were a competent force. Generally, however, the Greeks didn't really concern themselves with Rome because it was a foreign, barbarian civilization. On the flip side, Rome continued expanding throughout the Mediterranean with an elite made up of Philhellenes and, in the 2nd century BC, conquered mainland Greece. This was the genesis of a new Roman culture deeply influenced by Greece. In the words of the Roman poet Horace, conquered Greece in turn captured her vicious conqueror. The subjugated Greeks were a beacon of civilization for Rome across pretty much every aspect of society. As slaves or free citizens, they found themselves teaching the youth of the Roman elite about art, science, architecture, and countless other subjects that were ported wholesale from the Hellenic world to the Roman one. Latin absorbed countless vocabulary from Greek, which on its own became one of Rome's co-official languages, to the point where Latin was theorized to have been a Greek dialect. The Greek reaction varied, because for some of them Rome remained the brutal savages that had attacked Greece, but others were able to accept the Hellenized Romans as having escaped the barbarian label. Likewise, some Romans saw the heavy Greek influence as a negative, a force that was corrupting their Latin roots. But overall, so much of Roman society was shaped by the Greeks that even though the two were separate civilizations, Rome was still spreading Greek culture alongside its own, and the line between the two became very blurry. Rome of course ends up eclipsing Greece entirely in scale, but as the empire declined and eventually fractured, Greek language and culture remained important, especially in the eastern half of the empire, which survived for a millennia as a predominantly Greek-speaking state. In other words, Rome starts as a foreign entity to Greece. It inserts itself into Greek society and intertwines with it, adopting as much of it as possible and eventually ending up as a main torchbearer of Greek culture. This Greco-Roman relationship actually parallels the connection between Phainon and Amphoreus. Among all of Amphoreus' Chrysos heirs, Phainon, along with Cyrene, is a bit of an outsider, in the sense that he plays a different role in the story than the other heirs. His various designs echo the stages of Roman interaction with Greece throughout history, starting with the Phainon we first meet and the one we spend the most time with. This is the Phainon who's left behind Idyllic and arrives in the legendary city of Akama that he's only heard stories of to embark on the flame chase journey. He is, at this point in time, an outsider to the rest of Amphoreus, a self-described Outlander. His homeland is so far removed from the rest of Amphoreus that it shows up in the Outworld category on the map. Unlike the bustling city-states or crumbling kingdoms that the other heirs are from, no one's ever heard of Idyllic. It might as well not even exist for all they know. For Phainon, however, his small village is all that's on his mind. It's the only thing driving him forward and the reason he's come to Akama in the first place. In the same vein, the Greeks barely paid any attention to Rome before they were conquered by them, whilst the Romans had been continuously exposed to Greek civilization as they expanded elsewhere in the Mediterranean. As Phainon settles down in Akama and joins the ranks of the Chrysos heirs, he gets his new look courtesy of Aglaia, which is no small thing if you consider her character. Aglaia is the most renowned seamstress of Amphoreus from a rich, noble family, as well as the cold, calculating dictator of Akama. She obviously doesn't trust strangers. She almost kills the Trailblazer in Dan Heng in the patch where we meet her. In comparison, Phainon was also a strange newcomer, with nothing to his name except a burning desire for vengeance against the Flame Reaver and tales of a far-flung village that even Aglaya's golden thread had never seen. He's essentially a textbook barbarian, both by the original Greek definition and the modern one. He's a country bumpkin, someone who is pretty much clueless about the urban Achaemenid way of life because he grew up outside of its culture. He has many quirks that will make him a bit strange by the standards of Amphorean society, like his obsession with salads, his recreational activities, and his notably terrible fashion sense. In spite of all these faux pas, Aglaya and the other heirs take him under their wing, becoming his teachers and mentoring him to become Amphoreus' savior. Their goal is to mold Phainon into the hero the world needs, acknowledging that he will eventually become the greatest of the heirs. This parallels the way Greek culture actually spread throughout the Roman state, through the conquered Greeks teaching their new overlords about how to succeed in the world. From this point onwards, Phainon begins walking the long, arduous path to become the destined deliverer of Amphoreus, the one who's meant to enact the Era Nova. This is a role that Phainon grows into. It's through blood, sweat, and tears that he becomes a hero, the radiant sun in the sky that illuminates everyone else's path but is destined to outlast them. Above all, this Phainon is a warrior and a commander who leads by example as he charges into battle in the quest for the Core Flames. He is the Flame Chase journey's most exemplary soldier, but also its eventual leader, and as a result, the outfit Aglaya makes for him simultaneously reflects his beginnings, his journey, and his ultimate potential, mixing various elements of Roman military attire to do so. First is the big blue cape with a yellow underside that hangs on his left shoulder. This kind of cape draws inspiration from two kinds of Roman cloaks. The first kind is a sagum, a type of cloak that, like Phainon's cape, is fastened onto a shoulder and worn especially by soldiers. It was so emblematic of Rome's military that it was actually considered a symbol of war. Its counterpart, the symbol of peace, was a toga, worn by male Roman citizens. Within Amphoreus, Phainon's cloak sets him apart in the same way. Amongst the everyday citizens of Achaea, his cape is relatively unique. Only a select few other characters like Maide or Krataros are seen with one, and they're also warriors themselves. It really cements the idea that Phainon is at war, constantly moving forward on his journey, and not allowing himself any rest because, as a soldier, his campaign hasn't ended yet. This unrelenting spirit is shown throughout the story, whether when Phainon threw himself into Nicodor's trial, simulated his fight against the Flame Reaver, or just his constant sparring with Maide. The sagum was a common practical garment that any regular Roman soldier might wear. It was essentially just a piece of rectangular cloth, not made of high-end materials, unlike Phainon's cape, which was delicately made by Aglaya herself. Also unlike Phainon, soldiers usually wore the sagum on their right shoulders. A second style of Roman military cloak was a paludamentum. Unlike the sagum, the paludamentum could be worn on the left shoulder too. It was considered a higher quality cloak that was cut with a curved edge so that when it fell to its wearer's side, it had a more graceful fold. It was worn mainly by Roman emperors and generals with large, ornate brooches to hold them in place. This all aligns with Phainon's cape as it represents his growth as a Chrysos heir. As the number of Titans and Chrysos heirs alike slowly dwindle, Phainon takes up the mantle of leadership to complete the Flame Chase. In the final act of the 33,550,337th cycle, Phainon does essentially become the commander of both the remaining heirs and Amphoreus, as everyone turns to him for orders and reassurance. This cape was always intended for this version of Phainon, the one nurtured by the other heirs into this leadership role, the fully realized world-bearer ready to fulfill his destiny. Let's talk about the cape's color. Traditionally, neither the sagum nor the paludamentum were ever colored in shades of blue or gold. Blue was a bit of a taboo color in both ancient Greece and Rome because it was worn by many neighboring non-Greek and non-Roman societies who were considered barbarians and were at times real military threats. For as long as we've known Phainon, he's worn his heart on his sleeve. He's never hidden his longing for his lost home, the rolling wheat fields of Aedes Elysiae, and it is an integral part of his character from how he greets us to what keeps him grounded. The use of blue here is a reminder that the quaint, simple village where time seems to have stopped is where his heart really lies, and that he's still a bit of a foreigner anywhere else. If you look at the other playable heirs, there's only one other character that has this deep, dark blue coloring on her clothes. Cypher, another foreigner who's not even technically a human, but is also mentored by Aglaia. Within Roman society, blue clothes were also worn on somber occasions, during times of grief and mourning. Such a heavy connotation fits perfectly with Phainon's role in the story. Consider one of the most common quotes spoken by Amphoreus' cast.
Losses are constant on the flame chase journey.
This hits harder for Phainon than anybody. He is destined to be the last survivor of any given cycle, meaning he is bound to witness the loss of every single person in his world. At the same time, because he has to constantly keep moving to fulfill Era Nova, he has no chance to actually mourn or grieve his friends. The blue on his cape is a reminder of everything he carries with him, all the wishes of those that have been lost, and a sign that he hasn't yet forgotten them. The golden underside only reinforces this point. In many cultures today, gold is an utmost sign of luxury and opulence, and Rome was no different, but it also had a unique interest in golden thread, just like the kind Aglaia uses. The golden thread was itchy and extremely heavy, and the whole underside of Phainon's cape being made out of it symbolizes the weight he carries on his journey. Only when he actually reaches the Era Nova can he turn the cape over, bringing those countless lives into tomorrow, a new world lit up by a warm sun. The reason I started with Phainon's cape is that it reflects the three core thematics of his design. His unique Outlander origin, his role as a warrior of the Flame Chase, both as a humble soldier and as a destined hero, and lastly the weight he bears as a result of his duty and how it affects him. These are the themes that recur across the rest of Phainon's design, starting with his upper body. The main piece is an ankle-length brown and white coat lined with yellow. Two pauldrons rest on each of his shoulders, a white one on the right shoulder and a smaller blackish brown one on his left shoulder that matches the single arm guard on his left arm. His other hand has a golden wrist guard instead with a fingerless glove. There's no direct early Roman or Greek counterpart to the long open style he has, but in the later Byzantine era, the Scaramangion was a widely worn coat that featured long sleeves, a belt and slits on the side. Just like Phainon, it had foreign origins. It was inspired by the kaftan worn in Middle Eastern cultures. Such coats were lavish and ceremonial, but were also actively used for horse riding, resonating with the two duties Phainon is left with. His coat is like his hero uniform, a bit of a status symbol, but it's also practical, suited to his days marching forward out on the field. The colors of the coat especially align with this latter point. White was the most common color of the actual tunics Roman soldiers wore, whilst a mix of brown and golden yellow was found in the armor and accessories, the same as Phainon. The golden sun-themed gems found throughout his outfit are of course in-world references to him being Amphoreus' burning sun, but that itself is a possible reference to the Roman Sol Invictus, literally meaning the invincible sun. In the late 3rd century, before Christianity became Rome's dominant religion, Sol Invictus officially was promoted by the emperor and had the largest, most widespread cult across Roman territories, something which mirrors the fact that Phainon was endorsed by all those around him to become the world-bearer. The tone of Phainon's lower body is pretty much the opposite of his top half. Black pants and boots with far less decorative embroidery. Phainon's boots are knee-high, and whilst this could just be a quirk shared with many other male characters' designs, historically this cut of boot came into prominence from the 15th century onwards, when soldiers on horseback needed more protection on their legs. So, even though this style isn't very Greek or Roman, it does serve to emphasize Phainon's warrior status and goes along with his long coat. Now, the actual heel of his footwear is more of a mix of a shoe and a boot, and that's because that's exactly what it is, a black Roman shoe boot. Roman shoe boots were worn with a strap around the ankle like Phainon, and those of a black color were specifically worn by Roman senators. It's even said that they had crescent symbols on them, like the half-sun on the upper part of Phainon's boot. Senators were a mainstay across all of Roman history. The Senate was a permanent institution whose power fluctuated throughout the eras of Rome, going from near total authority in the time of the Republic to diminished but still prestigious in the imperial period. It makes perfect sense for Aglaia to have made such a high-end piece of footwear for her protege. Part of his duty is to understand the political world before he's actually tasked with leading it forward, which is why we see him present at nearly every meeting of the heirs or the citizens' assembly. The elephant in the room are Phainon's pants, and I'm actually going to talk about them in conjunction with Phainon's Flame Reaver outfit, given that he keeps them and the general black coloring in that form. In both ancient Greece and Rome, pants were the sign of a barbarian, an uncivilized person of very poor taste. With that context, the decision to give Phainon monochrome, relatively simple pants is pretty unique. Yes, most male characters in the game have similar pants, but the only other playable Amphorean warrior, Maide, has far more detailed pants that are more like actual armor than just regular trousers. The reason behind this design choice for Phainon's pants actually lies in the later history of Roman pants. As Rome expanded and integrated some of the previously barbarian cultures, pants came into style, especially for the military. In frontier areas like Gaul, Britannia, and Dacia, long trousers were better suited to the local climates than the typically short Roman tunics, and more of the Roman army began wearing them. The trouser craze got so bad that in 397 the dual emperors Arcadius and Honorius issued a decree banning pants, but the damage was done. The Western Empire fell less than a century later, and in the eastern half pants became official uniform, not only no longer taboo but now required to be worn. In other words, the timeline of pants in the Roman era mirrors the periods of Phainon's life as we encounter them. First, as an outlandish foreign element that no one could even fathom, then as a sudden scorned reality that no one could deny, finally a mainstay of the land that I'll acknowledge as such. Let me backtrack to that second part, the scorned reality, and talk about why the design emphasizes dark colors. Black was the Roman color of death and misfortune. This is the reason that even today, in most Western cultures, people wear black at funerals or in the wake of calamity. For base Phainon, the black pants are the hardships he has experienced to that point, namely the destruction of his entire home by the Flame Reaver and the eventual loss of all his friends leading up to his final confrontation with, well, himself at the Vortex of Genesis. Flame Reaver Phainon's design is entirely black because now that despair is his entire reality. He's stuck endlessly delaying the Era Nova, waiting for a way out, a fate so taxing it erodes his very being. But he's also that same source of despair for the people of those cycles as he reenacts their destruction time and time again. People hated the Flame Reaver, and for good reason. They had no way of knowing his path of destruction was the only thing keeping Amphoreus alive, just like how the Greeks that hated the Romans as savage conquerors had no way of knowing Rome would eventually spread Greek culture further than ever before. In spite of this, we see that the Flame Reaver himself has not forgotten his duty. He knows that he has no choice but to endure his fate, but even then he will not stop fighting against it, even as his own mind starts leaving him in the later part of the cycle. It's thus fitting that he's wearing a hooded cloak like the painula. The painula was an all-weather piece of clothing that was initially worn by Roman slaves, but later was widespread among soldiers too, representing both the Flame Reaver's own captivity, his inability to break the cycles, but also his persistence as he keeps the fight going. We witness those 33 million cycles of grief culminate in Phainon's ascension to his true form, the one bearing his real name, Khaslana. This is Phainon at the height of his power and rage, the one standing over the rest of the world, ready to bring it crashing down on the old order to build a new world in its wake. In his Khaslana form, Phainon performs the greatest feat yet seen in Amphoreus, scratching Nanook directly. The colors of this form are extremely symbolic. The various shades of gold and dark bluish indigo are no coincidence, knowing that Phainon's favorite colors are yellow and purple. These were the colors of royalty and status throughout Roman history. Purple was the most luxurious color during the Roman era. It was exceedingly expensive and hard to produce, and specific shades of purple dye were reserved for the emperor's exclusive use. The official color of the Eastern Roman Empire was a shade of purple made from shellfish, and generally anyone who could afford purple wore it as often as possible. Now, as I mentioned with the cape, gold was also a sign of high status and was a very heavy material to wear. Khaslana is at this point half golden himself, and wears a golden crown of all the core flames he's absorbed. Gold is important in the universe as the color of Nanook and the heir's blood, but per the Roman perspective, it also symbolizes the sheer weight Khaslana is now not just carrying but wielding. It's the weight of those millions of core flames that grant him power and the fuel to burn brighter than ever before. For Khaslana's design to be exclusively in these two colors that are shared with the core flames themselves really pushes home the idea that he is at this world's apex in this form. We actually know Phainon's own understanding of these two colors, and it goes in conjunction with the Roman meaning. In his mind, yellow represents joy and responsibility, and purple represents life. As Khaslana, this is the closest Phainon comes to breaking Amphoreus free from the scepter. It's something he's personally seeing through that, if he succeeds, will restore the right to a real, non-simulated life to the people. In Roman terms, this would be his Pax Romana. It's both a time where he's reached unprecedented new heights of prestige, power, and influence, but also of responsibility. A time where he sits enthroned atop the world, but when the crown weighs heaviest. Lastly, I want to talk about young Phainon, specifically as he shows up in the final cutscene for Amphoreus. Phainon is a character with a lot of baggage. He is defined by his suffering, his struggle to put an end to that suffering, and his desire to carry everyone along with him to that new dawn. His wish, in his own words, is to
fulfill everyone else's wishes.
Which makes this final scene of him in class and playing basketball with Maide very poignant. This is Amphoreus after it's all over, living their best lives in the wake of Iron Tomb's defeat, and young Phainon is dressed very similarly to how he was in his youth, before he got his hero's outfit, with his grey short-sleeved tunic and his white toga. There's only one big difference between the designs, and that's that his sash, the only blue part of his outfit, is gone, and it stays gone for the other scenes of that perfect, idealized Amphoreus. Remember, in Roman society, blue signified both mourning and to be foreign, and after 33,550,337 cycles, Phainon is no longer a stranger stuck longing for Ides Elysia. He no longer needs to grieve his friends and family, because he's now brought them all to that new world, made their wishes come true, and, for the first time ever, is able to leave behind all that blue clothing because he has finally found his home once more. That's all from me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below your thoughts. I love talking about the choices behind Phainon's design, and more Hsrlore content is soon to come. Alright, take it easy, and until next time.